The wildest part wasn't that the HOA chained off my road. It's that they did it on my land, with their lock, their sign, their confidence, and somehow still thought I was the one trespassing. You ever watch somebody build their own disaster in slow motion and smile while they do it? Yeah, that's basically this story. My father bought that padlock in 1991, the year he handed me the deed to the ranch. Heavy brass thing, old school, solid, the kind of lock that feels like it could outlive an argument, a lawsuit, and half the people involved in both. It sat in the top drawer of the ranch office for 22 years. Never moved. Never needed. I always knew exactly where it was. Then one Monday morning in early December, just after 7, I drove out to the western gate with 2 things in the truck: a closure notice my attorney had prepared, and that lock. It was cold enough to see my breath when I stepped out. Gray morning, quiet road, frost still hanging in the grass along the ditch line. The kind of winter morning where every sound travels: boots on gravel, chain rattling against steel, paper snapping in the wind. I clipped the notice to the gate in a weatherproof sleeve, 2 pages plus attachments, the certified survey, the title analysis, the 1991 deed showing the road belonged to me. Fee simple, clean, no easement, no right-of-way, no nothing. Then I threaded the chain through, snapped my father's padlock shut, stood there a second looking at it, and drove back to feed cattle. That was it. No yelling. No scene. No speech. Just a lock, a notice, and 46 years of public records finally getting to do the talking. The first car hit the gate at 4:47 that afternoon. I know that because Walt Pute called me later and gave me the count like a man reading rainfall measurements. Walt's my neighbor, retired civil engineer, 35 years in infrastructure, the kind of guy who can glance at a fence post and tell you whether it's plumb, overset, or sitting 6 inches inside the wrong deed line. By 5:30, he'd counted 27 vehicles backed up on the approach road. People standing in the December cold, collars up, hands in pockets, reading the notice, then reading the deed underneath it, then reading it again like the wording might change if they stared hard enough. And here's the part that still makes me laugh, even now, 6 weeks earlier, those same folks' HOA had fenced and padlocked that exact same road and hung a laminated sign on it like they were annexing Poland. Pinnacle Ridge HOA, community perimeter, authorized access only. Fresh concrete around the posts, bright new barbed wire, shiny lock, nice little tag, whole thing looking real official. Trouble was it wasn't their road. It had been in my family since 1978, when my father graded it himself with a tractor and a blade, because he was tired of depending on a neighbor's informal crossing to reach the county highway. He built that road the way he built everything: slow, solid, practical, meant to last. Recorded it in 1979. Conveyed it to me in 1991. Clean title all the way through. Anyone could have found that out with one trip to the county recorder's office and a little professional humility. But humility, apparently, was not part of the Pinnacle Ridge budget. Let me back up a sec. I've driven the western perimeter road of this ranch almost every morning for 34 years. Not because I'm sentimental about gravel, but because 420 acres of working cattle land teaches you something pretty quick. Problems are smaller when you catch them early. Broken fence, low water, sick calf, storm damage, you want eyes on things before the day gets away from you. So one Wednesday morning in early November, around 6:52, coffee in the console, radio off, same as always, I came around the cedar break on the southwest side of the property and stopped dead. Fence across the road. Not an old fence. Not some leaning, rusted leftover. Brand new. Posts sunk in pale concrete, still damp in the morning cold. 6 strands of bright barbed wire catching the first light. Swing gate in the middle. Chain. Padlock. Laminated tag. I sat there with the engine idling and just stared at it through the windshield. You know that feeling when something is so stupid it takes your brain a second to accept it as real? That was me. I read the sign once. Then again. Same words both times. HOA. Community perimeter. Authorized access only. I got out, walked up to the gate, looked at the hardware, checked the footings, followed the line north and south with my eyes. It tied into the southern fence they'd put up 6 weeks earlier, the first part of this whole circus. That fence ran along my southern boundary, except not actually along it. It ran 25 to 31 inches inside my property line, cutting off a skinny strip of grazing land like the HOA had decided my pasture needed trimming. They'd sent me a letter before that first fence went in. 1 page, friendly tone, full of administrative confidence. Community Perimeter Definition Project. Enhanced security. Clarified boundary. No survey attached. No request for input. No acknowledgement that the line they were fencing wasn't theirs. I photographed the letter. Photographed the fence. Called my attorney, Meredith Kane. Said nothing to the HOA. That part mattered. Because Meredith is one of those lawyers who doesn't waste motion. 18 years in property rights law, sharp as cold iron, and the first thing she told me when the southern fence went up was, document everything. Don't say a word. So that morning in November, standing at the new road gate with their lock on my road, I called her again. She picked up on the third ring. They fenced the road, she said, and it wasn't really a question. They fenced the road, I told her. I described everything, the gate, the lock, the tag, the concrete, the line tying into the southern installation. She let me finish, quiet for a beat, and then gave me instructions like a field officer talking to somebody she trusted not to freelance. Don't touch the fence. Don't remove the lock. Don't contact Sandra Hollis or anyone from the HOA. Drive the full installation. Photograph every post, every sign, every connection. Get it all into the file by noon. Then she said something I still remember almost word for word. The southern fence was trespass, she said. This is control. They just handed us everything. So I did exactly what she said. Drove the whole line. Photographed 23 posts. Logged the time, the location, the concrete cure, the way the footing near the gate was still damp while the north end had already hardened. Told us the work probably ran over 2 days and finished overnight. Wrote it all in the ranch log the same way my father used to. No emotion. Just fact. That logbook matters more than people think. Ranchers keep those things for water rotation, cattle movement, weather, repairs, but they're also legal records if you've got the discipline to treat them that way. My father understood that. Meredith understood it too. By noon, every photo was in her shared file. By afternoon, she'd already started assembling what turned into a 4-inch binder of pure HOA self-destruction. Now here's where the story gets better, because this wasn't just one bad fence decision by one overconfident board. This thing had roots. Back in 2001, when the plateau above my ranch was still just open ground and brochures waiting to happen, a developer bought the land and planned a 287-home subdivision. Great views, neat rows of rooftops, nice little yards, you know the type. Problem was, the land didn't have practical direct access to the county highway. The easiest route was down the western slope, along my family's road. So the developer's project manager came to the ranch and talked to my father. My father said yes. Not yes as in grant. Not yes as in sell. Not yes as in record an easement. He said yes the way a certain generation of ranchers said yes. Neighbor to neighbor, handshake, courtesy, no paperwork, because it cost him nothing and he figured common sense would survive the arrangement. There was a witness to that conversation too. Walt. That was the twist nobody at Pinnacle Ridge saw coming. Walt had been over at the ranch that day in 2001 talking drainage with my father and heard the whole thing from the porch. Years later, when this whole mess started coming apart, Meredith got a notarized statement from him. 5 pages. Precise, careful, technical. He quoted my father almost exactly. You can use the road. Just understand it's our road, and we're letting you use it as neighbors. That one statement crushed the HOA's best fantasy. The idea that 22 years of road use had somehow matured into a prescriptive easement. Doesn't work like that when the use was permitted. You can't turn courtesy into ownership just because you got comfortable. Meanwhile, Meredith kept building the case. She hired Philip Oakes, a surveyor with a reputation for work that survives cross-examination. He mapped every fence post against the recorded boundary. Southern fence? Average encroachment of 29 inches inside my line. Not uniform either, which told you they weren't following a real boundary. They were following some internal HOA site map somebody mistook for legal truth. The road fence? Worse. That thing sat squarely on my private road, posts driven right into the gravel surface, concrete poured like they expected to own the place for the next 50 years. Then Meredith brought in a title specialist, Carol Vance, who traced the chain from my father's purchase through the 1979 road notation, the 1991 transfer to me, the subdivision approvals, all of it. 16 pages later, the conclusion was simple: no recorded easement, no right-of-way, no access agreement, no legal entitlement of any kind. Just a verbal courtesy arrangement and 22 years of people assuming paperwork existed because nobody had ever bothered to check. And then Sandra Hollis, the HOA president, did the single dumbest thing in the whole story. She sent me a letter. Not an apology letter. Not a question. Not even a bluff with legal citations. A paving letter. Signed on HOA letterhead, cheerful as sunshine, telling me the board intended to pave the access road in the spring as a community infrastructure improvement. My road. Without my consent. Without an easement. Without even the basic decency to ask. When I read that letter at the kitchen table, I actually laughed. Just once. Short and dry. Then I scanned it and sent it to Meredith with one line. Second letter. Paving project. Spring. No response from me. Your call. She phoned me 20 minutes later, and I could hear it in her voice, that rare lawyer mix of professional restraint and pure delight. She announced in writing, Meredith said, her intent to make permanent improvements to property the HOA does not own. That letter became Exhibit F. And believe me, Exhibit F did some work. Now Sandra had a problem, even if she didn't know it yet. Because up until then, she could maybe tell herself this was a survey mistake, a paperwork mix-up, a contractor issue, whatever story people tell when arrogance meets consequences. But a signed letter announcing plans to pave somebody else's road? That's not confusion. That's intent with a letterhead. She kept reading my silence as weakness. That was her second biggest mistake. First biggest was not checking the deed in the first place. See, people like Sandra get used to opposition making noise. Complaints, angry emails, board meeting drama, social media whining, all that. So when somebody stays quiet, they assume he's folding. They never imagine he's just building a cleaner file than they are. By late November, Meredith had everything certified, notarized, tabbed, and ready. 41-page complaint, 12 exhibits, closure notice prepared. She asked when I wanted to move. I told her to send the closure notice first. Not for leverage. Not to negotiate. Just because 287 households were about to learn their daily access road had never been legally secured, and I figured they deserved one day with the truth in their hands before the lawsuit landed. That was probably the last favor anybody in this story did for Pinnacle Ridge. So Monday morning, I locked the gate. The certified mail hit the HOA office around 10:15. Sandra opened it. Read the deed. Read the survey. Read the title analysis. Called their attorney, Brett Vogel. Now, to Brett's credit, he apparently understood the magnitude of the disaster a lot faster than Sandra did. By the time he finished reading Meredith's package, he knew exactly what they were sitting on. Clean deed, strong survey, no easement, no prescriptive claim, written evidence of intentional encroachment, personal exposure for the paving letter signatory. Real bad day at the HOA office. But Sandra didn't tell the board the full story right away. Didn't tell the residents either. And that's when the second unexpected character stepped in, Grace Ewan. Grace lived in Pinnacle Ridge. Retired civil litigator. Bought her house in 2004. Smart, calm, the kind of woman who doesn't need to raise her voice because the documents are already doing the yelling for her. She sat at her kitchen table with the closure notice, the survey, the title analysis, the deed, and a pen, and read everything the way a real lawyer reads. Start to finish, no skimming, no magical thinking. Then at 6 in the morning she posted a long, brutally clear breakdown on the residents' forum explaining exactly what the notice said, what fee simple ownership meant, why the absence of a recorded easement mattered, what the trespass claims were, and why Sandra's paving letter was about as legally helpful as signing a confession in glitter ink. By that evening the community forum was on fire. People weren't just mad about the road. They were asking the question nobody had asked in 22 years. If the rancher owns the road, how did we all buy homes here without legal access? Yeah, great question. Sandra called an emergency board meeting that Sunday night. 63 people showed up for a room built for 40. Folks lined the walls and hallway, phones out, Grace's post open on their screens like study notes before an exam. Sandra opened with all the usual spin, boundary matter, adjacent landowner, active legal resolution, temporary disruption. Real polished right up until Grace raised her hand. She stood up, identified herself, and asked one simple thing first. Had the board conducted a title search on the access road before authorizing the fence project? Sandra said they relied on existing site documentation. Grace asked which recorded instrument supported that understanding. Sandra stalled. Grace asked whether the HOA's understanding came from a certified survey or the developer's 2001 site map. More stalling. Then Grace picked up the paving letter and asked the question that broke the room open. "Were you aware," she said, calm as a church bell, "when you sent this October letter announcing the HOA's intent to pave the access road, that the road is the fee simple private property of Cord Baxter?" Nobody breathed. Sandra looked down, looked at Brett, looked back at the room. Then she said she believed the letter was consistent with the board's understanding of the community's infrastructure. That was it. That was the moment. Because everybody in the room heard what she didn't say. No, she hadn't checked. No, she didn't know. No, she had no instrument number, no easement, no legal basis, no real answer at all. She resigned Thursday morning. Short letter. Thanked the community. Mentioned personal legal matters arising from the boundary definition project. Didn't mention my road, the fence, the deed, Grace's question, or the fact that confidence had finally run straight into the county record books and lost. Howard Kell, the board member who'd voted against the fence project back in June, because he'd asked the obvious survey question nobody wanted to hear, stepped in as interim president. First thing he did was call Meredith. He said the board wasn't contesting the survey, the title analysis, or the trespass documentation. Said they wanted a recorded easement for the 287 families and a resolution fair to me in full. That mattered. So before the settlement conference, I reopened the road. Not because I had to. Legally I was in the clear either way. But those homeowners hadn't built the fence, signed the paving letter, or spent HOA money fencing a road they didn't own. They just trusted a system that should have been better run than it was. No reason to make them eat a 40-minute detour any longer than necessary. So Friday morning, 6:45, I drove to the gate, pulled the notice, unlocked my father's brass padlock, and swung it open. First car through slowed beside me. Gray sedan. Woman at the wheel looked over with that cautious, relieved expression people, where when they know something got fixed, but they're not yet sure who fixed it or how. I just nodded. The settlement conference happened the next week. Meredith on my side. Howard and Brett for the HOA. Grace in the room too, representing the homeowners in the only way that made sense. Somebody who actually understood the documents and cared about getting it right. Walt stayed available in the background if needed, quiet as ever, like a structural beam nobody notices until the building starts shaking. 2 days of negotiation, 10 more to finalize language. End result. 4 terms. Recorded permanent easement for Pinnacle Ridge, filed properly this time, running with the land, binding successors, all clean and public and undeniable. One-time payment to me for formalizing access, rights my family had allowed as a courtesy for over 2 decades. Full removal of both trespass fences at the HOA's expense, with restoration supervised to Philip Oakes's survey standard. And a formal recorded acknowledgement confirming the road had always been mine, that no prior easement existed, and that the new easement was being created now, not clarified, not recognized, created. Big difference. I signed the papers, shook Howard's hand, nodded to Grace, and drove home on my own road. That evening I sat on the porch with coffee and the logbook, wrote down the terms in 3 plain sentences, then added 1 line in the margin the way my father used to when something really mattered. Road deed confirmed. Easement recorded. Both fences coming down. Matter closed. Later Walt called, same as he had at every turning point in this whole mess. He was quiet for a second, then said, "Your father always said that road would matter someday." I looked out toward the western boundary, fence posts still standing for the moment, sunset falling off them, the road running past like it always had, through our land, toward the county highway, steady as truth. He was right, I told him. And that's the part that sticks with me. My father built that road because he didn't want our future depending on somebody else's permission. For 22 years, I let hundreds of people use it because being a good neighbor costs nothing, until somebody mistakes your kindness for weakness, your silence for surrender, and your property for theirs. So here's the question. When does courtesy stop being neighborly and start becoming an invitation for people to take advantage? And if you were in my boots, would you have locked that gate sooner or done exactly what I did and waited until the record was bulletproof? Tell me what you think. Was it justice, revenge, or just a man finally defending what was always his? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a boundary fight, or somebody treating your generosity like it came with a deed transfer, I want to hear that too.